morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Lessons from Analytical Innovators, Reimagining the Possible. Brought to you by SAS, MIT Sloan Management Review, and All Analytics, and broadcast by United Business Media. I'm Beth Schultz, today's moderator. We want to make sure this event is as interactive as possible, so I'd like to make a few announcements prior to beginning. There are elements of this webinar that will appear as pop-ups, and we want to make sure you can view them. At this time, we recommend you disable any pop-up blockers you have if you haven't done so already. This webcast includes an audience polling question. When we're ready to ask the poll, you'll see the question appear in your slide presentation window. You may complete the poll when it appears by selecting your answer within the presentation window and then clicking the Submit Answer button. Thanks in advance for your participation. Speaking of participation, you can join our interactive Q&A session at the end of the event by submitting your questions at any time during the webinar. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text area below the media player window and then click the Submit button. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If you'd like, you may download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Download Slide button located below the presentation window. And lastly, if you are experiencing any technical problems, please click on the Help link below the media player, and that will take you to our webinar help guide. You can also contact our live technical support helpline. Their number is located within the guide as well. And now to the presentation, Lessons from Analytical Innovators, Reimagining the Possible. Discussing today's topic will be David Kiron, Executive Editor, MIT Sloan Management Review. Prior to MIT SMR, David was a senior researcher at Harvard Business School and a research associate at the Global Development and Environment Institute at Tufts University. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Rochester and a BA from Oberlin College. Our second speaker is Renee Boucher Ferguson, contributing editor of MIT Sloan Management Review. Renee has held senior research analyst roles at Edison Group and Kennedy Consulting Research and Advisory, where her research focused on the intersection of CRM, business intelligence, and social media. She also spent 8 years as a senior writer with Ziff Davis Media, covering enterprise technology, including enterprise applications, cloud computing, middleware, and infrastructure. Lastly, we have Pamela Prentice, who is Chief Research Officer with SAS. Pamela has spent 30 years of experience in the field of market research in the corporate arena and as a college professor. As the Chief Research Officer for SAS, she focuses on researching current practices in information management and the use of business analytics. She specializes in deriving insights from qualitative and quantitative information to help address key business issues.
So this is David Kiron. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a nice crowd, and I'd like to start off by offering some details about the research that we're doing. I'm having trouble pushing the next slide. Somebody could, thank you. So what I'd like to do is start off by just talking a little bit about the research we've done and explain why we're excited about this research project. Some of what you'll see or hear today is in the report. Some will be new material that didn't make it into the report that we recently published. Broadly, we're going to be talking about our key findings and lessons learned about analytical innovators. But first, let's take a look at what we did. Here's a rough overview of the main quantitative and qualitative methods we took. We surveyed 2,500 business professionals and interviewed more than 30 executives. Many of the managers were executives of some type. So we've tried to be as comprehensive as possible in terms of industries and geography. That's about those are the dry facts of what we did. But why we're excited about this research is really captured well by something that Sandy Penland, the Director of Entrepreneurship Program at the MIT Media Lab, said a year or so ago. For those of you who don't know Sandy or haven't heard of him, in 2011, he was chosen as one of the world's top data scientists by Tim O'Reilly in Forbes magazine. So this is what Sandy Pentland had to say about the big data revolution and the changes that are to come. He says, as you move into a society driven by big data, most of the ways we think about the world change in a rather dramatic way. For instance, Adam Smith and Karl Marx were wrong, or at least had only half the answers. Why? Because they talked about markets and classes, but those are aggregates, they're averages. While it may be useful to reason about the averages, social phenomena are really made up of millions of small transactions between individuals. There are patterns in those individual transactions that aren't just averages. They're the things that are responsible for the flash crash and the Arab Spring. You need to get down into these new patterns, these micro-patterns, because they don't just average out to the classical way of understanding society. We're entering a new era of social physics, where it's the details of all the particles, the you and me, that actually determine the outcome. We can potentially design companies, he says, organizations and societies that are more fair, stable, and efficient as we get to really understand human physics at this fine-grained scale. This new computational social science offers incredible possibilities. The fact that we can now begin to actually look at the dynamics of social interactions and how they play out and are not just limited to reasoning about averages like market indices is, for me, simply astonishing. To be able to see the details of variations in the market and the beginnings of political revolutions, to be able to predict them and even control them is definitely a case of Promethean fire. Big data can be used for good or bad, but either way, it brings us to interesting times. We're going to reinvent what it means to have a human society, Sandy finishes. So this coming change that Pentland refers to, if it is to come, is going to have leaders in the business world, first movers who recognize the value of data and analytics, who commit their organizations to valuing data and analytics in new ways, and who find strategic advantage by doing so. These analytical innovators are the ones we identify in our report and in the research we've done as the leaders. Our report focuses on their distinctive practices and attitudes toward data and analytics, and is a focal point for what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, Pamela is going to talk a little bit more about our excitement, the big data, the data and analytics changes to come, and more of what we've done.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. Pamela Prentice, Chief Research Officer at SAS, and I'm really excited to be with my colleagues from MIT this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are, as Beth said, and talk about the findings from this research. So everyone knows that research on analytics and big data is not new, and we had a number of different assumptions coming into this study that we wanted to talk just briefly about. The assumptions were really to guide our direction in the research and to be sure that we framed our research in the right context so that we were uncovering some new insights. So let me just briefly share a few of these things that we used as assumptions as we were embarking on this project. The first thing is that big data is a big deal. So information is a game changer, and David talked a little bit about that in the quote, and about the massive explosion of information across the world, and how companies are kind of grappling with getting their arms around big data and what big data means to them and what they can do with it. So the estimates of the size of the big data market vary widely. One estimate is that by 2020, the big data market will be $50 billion, and that would include technology, services, applications, and talent to support that. So that's a really compelling component of the underlying assumption. The second one is that analytics is really mainstream. Analytics is pretty much everywhere. Back in 2007, when Tom Davenport and Jeannie Harris published their book, Competing on Analytics, a lot of companies were just kind of dipping their toes in the water in terms of their use of analytics and tapping their information. the movie, the book and the movie more so, Moneyball, as we all know, really helped kind of popularize the concept of analytics over the past few years and sort of put it in the public eye. And then fairly recently, back in November of 2012, Nate Silver's election prediction, where he accurately predicted all 50 states in terms of their electoral votes, really brought analytics to the forefront, particularly in the U.S. And if anybody's a basketball fan, NCAA tournament coming up, there will be a lot of prognosticators who are using analytics to determine who will win, and maybe they'll win their office pools. And the final point in terms of the assumptions is that really it's not a question of value any longer about analytics. It's really been proven time and time again that analytics does work. Analytics is effective in increasing productivity, improving efficiency, and driving profitability. One of the most noted studies, that I'll give a shout out to one of the MIT faculty, Eric Brynjolfsson, noted in a study in 2011 that profitability of companies that use analytics increases by 6 or more %. So those are the kind of underlying assumptions that we used when we were framing the research. And some of the high-level things that we found out before we get into talking about the analytical innovators that we're interested in include the usage and confidence in data that the respondents in the survey had. So some of the key things that we learned were that there's an increased level of access to useful information. 70% of our respondents indicated that they now have more access to useful information in their organization. And 60% indicated that they have increased confidence in their data. Some of the underlying factors related to that confidence are timeliness. The data is more timely, it's more accurate. So there are some things that are kind of driving that confidence. However, with that said, 35% of our respondents, only 35%, indicated that they frequently or always have the information they need to make key business decisions. So while companies are gaining increased access, they're feeling better about their data, we still have kind of a way to go to get that information into the hands of decision makers, because that indicates that 65% feel like they're not quite getting the information that they need in order to drive those key business decisions. So despite that little dichotomy of access to information increasing, but there still being an information deficit, analytics is providing competitive advantage. What we're seeing over time is that between 2010 and 2012, when we conducted the latest piece of this research, there was an 80% increase in the companies who indicated that analytics provides them with a competitive advantage. We've gone from 37% in 2010 to 58%, 2011 to 67% in 2012. So we're continuing to see as analytics gets pushed throughout the organization and more companies are adopting analytics, that it is helping organizations change the way they do business, compete better, and become more effective. In addition to that, we were really interested in not just the value of the information provided by analytics, but where are companies taking that? What our survey indicated was that 60%, or 6 in 10 companies, agreed that analytics helps their companies innovate. So that's really the key point, the kind of the pivotal finding that we are combining with competitive advantage to sort of look at those organizations as the bellwether for how analytics can be driven effectively in the organization. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about that. we noted that a large number of organizations are achieving a competitive advantage with analytics, and that 60% said that analytics are helping them innovate. So if we take those two factors and we look at the organizations who say that analytics is providing them with a competitive advantage and that analytics is also helping them innovate, we can divide our respondents into three types of companies. And the first one is the analytical innovators, and this is the kind of the focus of our discussion today, which represent 11% of the survey respondents. These analytical innovators are the companies who said that analytics is providing them with a competitive advantage and that analytics is helping them innovate. So they're really kind of on the cutting edge of using analytics. They're getting a lot of value from the analytics, and analytics is helping them move forward with innovation. The second group, which is kind of the mainstream group, represents 60% of our respondents, and these are who we call the analytical practitioners. And these folks are doing a good job with analytics. They are getting value from analytics, but they're not quite moving into that strategic element of using analytics to innovate. They're more operational in terms of their use of analytics. And then the third group, which is just under 30%, the analytically challenged, are those folks who are on the low end of achieving competitive advantage with their analytics and really not getting that innovation out of analytics that the other two groups, or that the analytical innovators are getting.
Great. Now, Pam, let's jump over to our poll. If our audience members could please answer this, and then we'll share the results with you towards the end of the presentation near the Q&A. Take a few moments and answer which of the three types of companies listed below. Sorry about that. Which of the three types of companies listed below best describes your organization? Analytically challenged, analytical practitioner, analytical innovator, or none of the above? You could just submit your answer. And I think we can pick up with the presentation. Pam?
Okay, I think we have Renee up next.
We do, yes, thank you. Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Pamela. And hello, everyone. I am Renee Ferguson, and thanks for taking the poll to those that did. I think the results will be really interesting. I'm excited to see them, and it's a good segue into the next slide, which is you might be an analytically challenged organization if your company exhibits these four characteristics or earmarks that we determined through the course of our research. So we found in our research that there are four earmarks. They are data deficiency, a weak information value chain, a lack of collaboration, and no burning platform. So data deficiency is defined by the state of the analytically challenged group's data and what they are or aren't doing with it. Unlike the other groups, this group has generally not capitalized on big data trends, and their data management abilities are lagging. They report more frequently than the other groups that their data is unreliable or untimely, or that they have less confidence in their data, so in the level of detail provided or how the data is collected. For example, we found 24% of analytically challenged report that they are less confident in how their data is collected than they were a year ago. And this is versus 8% of analytical practitioners and just 6% of analytical innovators. As one survey respondent noted, analytics are only meaningful if the quality of the underlying data is unassailable. Until there is sufficient attention paid to data governance and quality assurance, analytics will remain little more than a lofty goal. So this group is also characterized by a weak information value chain, and we define this as the capturing, aggregating, and integrating data on one end and then analyzing and disseminating those insights on the other end. We found that less than half, or 42%, of the analytically challenged group report being effective at capturing information, and their capabilities in other areas are even weaker, with information dissemination at a low 21%. So as one respondent noted, we're collecting mass quantities of data. However, there is no specific plan in place to actively utilize the data. and only a vague concept of why we need it. In other words, no real plan. We're capturing data just in case. And then lack of collaboration, another earmark, is defined by this group's inability to collaborate across the organization using analytics. In our survey, only 35% of analytically challenged said that they are able to collaborate across their organization, and this is versus 76% of analytical innovators. We found this can be a result of data trapped in silos or data that is trapped from a cultural standpoint, but either way, there can be some significant impacts. So as one respondent tellingly noted, if we do not improve our collection, integration, analysis, and productive use of information across data silos, we will destroy our business. Lastly, we found that analytically challenged organizations often have no burning platform to push an analytics agenda forward. So they often believe that if they've gotten this far without using analytics, they'll continue to do so just fine, in the words of one respondent. These companies we found are fairly change resistant, so only 13% of analytically challenged strongly agree that their companies are open to approaching to approaches that change current practices, compared to 60% of analytical innovators. So as one respondent put it, unfortunately, the pain of declining profits in markets will have to take the lead before management will seriously look to analytics as a source of competitive advantage. No pain, no analytics seems to be the business model. So this brings us to the analytical practitioner group. Let me just cue up that slide. One moment. I'm sorry, that slide's not moving. Hold on. So we found that organizations in the analytical practitioner group exhibit three distinct characteristics, and they have just good enough data, they have an operational focus on analytics, and they have a fragmented analytics ecosystem. Where just good enough data comes in is that, unlike the analytically challenged group, analytical practitioners report significant progress in the area of useful data. So 76% of analytical practitioners reported their access to useful data increased over the past year, and this is versus 86% of analytical innovators and 55% of analytically challenged. In other words, the analytical practitioner group, as Pamela pointed out, have achieved a level at which they are able to make use of their data to help run their businesses, but there's still work to be done. So as one respondent noted, analytics are only as good as the data. Best practices for data management, integration, and governance are necessary for analytics to succeed. Otherwise, the adage, garbage in, garbage out, applies. Then analytics gets a bad name, and decision-making is done by a management intuition rather than based on facts originating in the data. So we found that analytical practitioners are also noted for their operational focus on data, which means this group is more focused on the day-to-day use of analytics rather than using analytics to drive innovation. So, for example, analytical practitioners said their top use of analytics is to reduce enterprise costs. And analytically challenged, by the way, had the same top use. And then compare this to analytical innovators, who said their top use of analytics is to make real-time decisions. And it's clear that the analytical innovators are using data strategically, whereas analytical practitioners are taking more of a practical approach with data. So as one respondent put it, analytics are mired in automating the existing rather than innovating a brighter performance future. It is a cultural problem that will not be mitigated until real leadership change occurs. And then finally, the analytical practitioners have a fragmented analytics ecosystem. And this is borne out, we found, in this group sometimes disjointed approach to the execution and use of analytics. For example, while 85% of analytical innovators indicate that an integrated approach to analytics is a core part of their business strategy, only 59% of analytical practitioners report the same. And then this contrast is similar in the group's ability to disseminate insights to employees. So 75% of analytical innovators report that they are effective at disseminating key insights versus 54% of analytical practitioners. As one survey respondent said, analytics are huge in my company. Until recently, though, it was held in the hands of very few people, to the point where we worried about the proverbial what if they get hit by a bus scenario. The past 12 months have been focused on integrating and trying to give data access to more people. So with that brings us to the Analytical Innovators group and what we found sets them apart. So give me just a moment, and we'll push the next slide. So the question we asked ourselves during research, once this small but significant group of analytical innovators emerged, is what makes them so different from the other groups. We determined 3 characteristics that define analytical innovators, and that is these organizations think differently, they act differently, and they have distinct outcomes. We'll go into each of these areas more in depth in the next slides, but before we do that, I want to provide a bit of a caveat with the Analytical Innovator Group, and that is that each one is not necessarily consistent within these categories across their organizations, or put another way, even within their own companies, analytical innovators can be at different levels within these groupings. So PayPal is a great example here. While this company is a digital native, they're essentially founded on the concept of using data as a core asset. Many of their strategies are defined by analytics, and those with data insights have a seat at the strategy table. They still tackle some of the same issues that other companies grapple with regard to data or big data. So, for example, whether analytics should be placed at the corporate level or departmentally, or staying ahead of infrastructure and data management issues, scaling data cost effectively, having effective data stewardship, or maintaining data consistency. And yet, this group emerged as a clear analytical innovator. So with that caveat in place, I'll turn the discussion back over to Pamela, and she can talk about how analytical innovators think differently.
Thank you. So we talked about the 3 groups, the analytically challenged, and those are the companies who really have not gotten off the ground in terms of getting their analytics function in order. We talked about what we call the practical majority, or the analytical practitioners, that's 60%, who are using analytics more for operational issues. And then what we're focusing on here are the analytical innovators, that 11% of our respondents. As Renee mentioned, that those are companies that perhaps at various functions or facets of their organization have exhibited those signs of an organization who is competing with analytics and who are driving innovation through their analytics, but not necessarily across the whole company. And as Renee also said, not all companies are created equal in this 11%. So what we want to do here is kind of talk about and drill into the characteristics that we think are different, that help these companies move their analytics from that operational focus to one that's more strategic. So the first one is really around their mindset. They think differently. One of the key things is that the analytical innovators tend to have more of a top-down analytical culture. In other words, a lot of these companies expressed that their management, their senior management particularly, had an analytics mandate that they were driving throughout the organization. We've all experienced the issue where analytics has been attempted maybe at the grassroots level because executives or the senior management is maybe reluctant to move off of the intuition or experience-based decision-making. A lot of times the executives don't trust the data that is being used in analytics, or maybe there are other issues, politically sensitive issues, or things that are really kind of inhibiting the use of analytics in the organization, or that culture that's driven by the executives. So again, one of the key differentiators here is that the analytical innovators tend to have senior management who have kind of put in place a mandate for analytics to be used throughout the organization. And somewhat related to that is that analytics is really core to the analytical innovators' business strategy. They value data. And because of that, data analysis and analytics are really driven into their business processes on an everyday and a strategic basis. So that they're really using analytics to run the business and to improve those efficiencies and effectiveness throughout facets of the business. Another one, in terms of the way they think, is that there are more analytics champions throughout the organization. One of the things that we asked in our survey was, to what extent do you agree with the statement, our organization has a number of analytics champions who use analytics and are evangelists throughout the organization? And the Analytical Innovators had a much higher percentage than other companies. And probably most telling in terms of both the quantitative and qualitative research is that these analytical innovators are really much more open to new ways of thinking. That was a specific survey question, and the difference between the analytical innovators who agree with that statement, our company is open to new ways of thinking, was a difference of 89% versus 59% for the rest of organizations. So there's really, kind of a core element here where the company is willing to experience new things and try different things. So that was the quantitative part of it in terms of the survey response. But we also saw this very frequently in the qualitative responses to questions about analytics, where organizations who are in that analytical innovator category would express their excitement and willingness to try analytics and had really a can-do attitude. They were looking at what was possible and where they could take analytics, as opposed to the analytically challenged and the analytical practitioners who are more of the mindset of, well, we can't do this, there are barriers to this, we have problems with this. So it was really a telling component of our research that openness and that willingness to look at things differently was a driving factor between these analytical innovators and the other two groups. The quote that we've pulled here from the survey responses is indicative of that mindset about the analytical culture, that analytics is the DNA of our organization. And I've used this picture of the cow here because one of our case studies is from a small but mighty firm, Overvice Dairy in the Midwest, where an atypical analytics user, a dairy, has really sort of taken themselves out of the 20th century and moved into the 21st century with their use of analytics. What the backstory is on Overvice Dairy is that they are a family-run company started back in the early 1900s, and really kind of progressed in a typical way that a family-run business would. And then within the past 5 years or so, wanted to expand their markets and get into some different lines of business, sort of going back to the home delivery of dairy products and things. And the CEO of the organization decided to bring in an analytics expert to help this company achieve that analytics focus. Well, the initial results were quite good, and the analytics expert, Bruce Bedford, who was responsible for this, made significant changes in efficiency and productivity, but didn't quite have the rest of the management on board. So there was a bit of an uphill struggle there, but did have the support of the CEO. So I guess the turning point in terms of the story is that when looking at where to expand the business, the other executives and managers were sort of looking at things from an operation logistic perspective. But Bruce wanted to bring in analytics to look at where the market was in terms of customer preferences and demographics, and they used analytics to determine where the best pockets of customers for their expansion and their new lines of business would be. So once he was able to show the different way to look at things, everyone else kind of quickly came on board, and now they're using information to expand their markets based on the analytics and not just the operational component. So that's a good compelling case study, a fairly small organization who is effective at using analytics to drive new ways of looking at things for their business. We turn it over to David to talk about how they act differently.
Thanks, Pamela. So we're going to take the next couple of slides, the next 5 slides, and talk about some of the main ways that analytical innovators are different from the other 2 groups that we've described. So we collected a lot of interesting data about sort of how different companies use data, their attitudes toward data, how much data they're using. So both the attitudes and practices around data. And what we found is that analytical innovators are very very different in how they the amounts of data they use and how they use analytics. So. And the reason why we've got a rather large pig there is that you could almost say that the analytical innovators feed off the data and get analytical insights that they use for a wide variety of purposes in their company, and that impacts how they use analytics. So the next slide talks about sort of how much data the different groups collect. And what we see, there are 2 things to note here. One is that purple band on the right side, and that's the answer. Respondents chose that they didn't know how much data their company collects. This is a bit of a silent, but it's kind of an interesting angle about sort of knowledge and the amounts of data. So recall that we had about 55% of our respondent pool in executive positions. And you might think, well, like, so what? Most people in an organization don't know how much data they collect. It's just not part of the lingua franca of the organization. Well, what's interesting here is that proportionally more analytical innovators know how much, or think they know how much, their organizations collect. So that indicates, well, it's not clear exactly what that indicates, but it's suggestive that the role of data, the role of analytics is pervasive enough that people are more aware of what they're doing with data. I mean, against that interpretation, we also spoke with Mandy Ginsberg, who's the CEO of Match.com, and after heralding the great things analytics can do in her company, and she was asked, well, how much data do you collect? You know, she didn't know the answer. So you can be really effective with analytics, both in terms of what you do with the data for strategic purposes and for innovation, but it's not necessarily the case that executives are going to know how much data they collect. The other interesting thing about this particular slide is that analytical innovators do tend to collect more data than other companies. About 22% of analytical innovators collect more than a petabyte, and that's about double the percentage of analytical practitioners who collect the same amount of information. And the numbers are analytical innovators collect about a quarter, collect less than 1 terabyte, slightly more than that collect more than 1 terabyte in the analytical practitioners category, and 30% of analytically challenged collect less than 1 terabyte. And but more than 1 petabyte, 22% of analytical innovators say they collect more than 1 petabyte. Analytical practitioners in our response pool collected 11% said they collected 11% more than a petabyte, and the analytically challenged group, 8% said they collected more than a petabyte of information, of data. So let's move to the next slide. So, well, how much of the data, whatever amount they collect, do analytical innovators use in comparison to the other groups? And here we find a very dramatic change. Or difference between the analytical innovators group and the other 2 groups. There are the actual percentages here are pretty telling. 70% of analytical innovators say they use either a great deal or all of the data they collect. Neither of the other groups comes close to this. 48% among analytical practitioners and 26% of the analytically challenged say they use either a great deal or all of the data they collect. That's a huge difference. The specific question that we asked was, how much of the data that is generated by your organization does your organization use? And just one thing to note here, we've got a sort of a 4-point scale, and not much, some, a great deal, all of it. We did ask sort of whether or not anybody used none of their data, and no one said, no one gave an answer to that. No one selected that. So I'd like to read another quote from Deepak Agarwal, who does data mining at LinkedIn. He says, and this is a typical, I choose this example because it sort of illustrates the kind of company and sort of what their approach is to the use of the data that they have among the Analytical Innovator group, within the Analytical Innovator group. He says, with utmost respect for our customers' privacy, every single bit of information eventually is used, but the raw data gets transformed in very complex ways. We get all this data. It gets stored in Hadoop clusters. There are many different analysts and data scientists who analyze the data, create different groupings of the data, create different aggregates of the data, look at different kinds of numbers on different user subpopulations, and then glean insights from it all. And that's what goes into improving the relevance of our products. So there's a very strong connection between the amount of data that analytical innovators use and really the advantages they're able to glean from that usage. So the second big theme that we found is that analytical innovators use analytics differently from other groups in pretty significant ways. In this slide, well, I hope everybody can read this, but we asked all the respondents sort of what are your top 3 uses of analytics. And what's interesting is that the analytical practitioners and the analytically challenged groups both said that their top uses of analytics were reduce enterprise costs and improve resource allocations. And that's very different from the analytical innovators, who said that their top uses of analytics are making real-time decisions, increasing customer understanding, and identifying new markets. And where there's a really big gap, and that's, I mean, it's kind of a wild slide, but what you can see just from the way the lines go is at the very peak of with the green line, which is analytical innovators, that's at making real-time decisions. And then for analytically challenged, this is something that those folks just aren't really doing yet. The other one, identifying new markets, there's a significant gap there between the analytical innovators and the other groups, and also with increasing customer understanding. I hope that's intelligible to everybody. But it's there's significant gaps between the way analytical innovators use analytics compared to the other 2 groups. So just to finish this off, the range of things that we asked the respondents to choose as, whether or not they're the main uses of analytics, included reduce enterprise costs, improve resource allocations, increase customer understanding, make real-time decisions, increase employee productivity, identify new markets, foster collaborative decision-making, accelerate the development of new products and services, and that's another area of difference between these 2 groups. Increase enterprise operational visibility, improve supply chain performance, manage enterprise risk exposures, and understand and prevent fraud. and what we've got, and what I've just described are some of the main differences between analytical innovators and the other two groups in terms of how they use their analytics. Another difference comes out in the when we asked respondents, how effective are you at using analytics to guide strategy? And here again, analytical innovators they use analytics to guide strategy at higher rates, which is not on this slide, but they're much more effective at it than the other two groups. So Pamela brought up the Oakland A's example before, and one of the things that we've noted both in our discussions with our interviews with executives and also from some of the survey data, that using analytics to guide strategy is tricky. It's really not as straightforward as using analytics to improve operational efficiency at a fab or for understanding customers. For strategy, there needs to be a fine balance between the use of analytics and the use of experience or intuition. And we use two examples in the report. One that discussed the case of the Oakland A's, where the Oakland A's did wind up getting a big advantage in their use of analytics, collecting data, using data about different baseball players and how they might produce when paired with one another. But what we found is that over time they lost that advantage that they were getting from analytics because other teams copied their approach, and they had to refashion the advantage that they got from analytics. And so if you're going to rely on analytics to guide strategy, it's something that you need to retool periodically, as you should with the strategy itself. Oftentimes, the second one is Caesars, and maybe we can talk about that at the we can talk about that during the Q&A period. But with that, let's talk about sort of how analytical innovators differ from other groups in terms of their outcomes. Renee?
Hi, thanks, David. Okay, so in addition to all the characteristics that set analytical innovators apart, we also noted something else, and that's distinct outcomes based on their use of analytics. One very big outcome, analytical innovators report a power shift in the organization toward those with data insights. And we found that the more an organization uses analytics to build competitive advantage and to innovate, the more likely it is to say that analytics has shifted its power dynamics. We found evidence in this shift both in our qualitative research interviews, at PayPal, where projects now require analytics to be considered a success, at Match.com, eBay, and LinkedIn, where analytics drive strategy and product development, and at Kaiser Permanente, where analytics is creating a shift toward a more proactive model of care delivery to millions of patients, and then also in our survey results as well. So 57% of analytical innovators agree that analytics has shifted the power structure within their organization versus 37% of analytical practitioners and just 13% of analytically challenged. And then what this power shift means is that more power is conferred upon those with the ability to analyze data. In other words, they get paid attention to more. Analytics projects get C-suite backing, and funds are allocated accordingly. So Neiman Marcus is a really great example of this. Where analytics was once consumed exclusively by mid-level managers, now with consistent project successes, analytics outcomes are regularly reported to the board and senior executives. And at the same time, analytics successes have also shifted funding priorities by, and I quote, substantial dollar figures, particularly in the marketing division that reaches across the organization's retail channels and brands. So we found this power shift can mean something else, too. It can challenge the age-old management art of using gut instinct and experience in making business business decisions. So, for example, we found that 46% of analytical innovators use data mostly or entirely to establish objectives and strategy for the organization versus 38% of analytical practitioners and 17% of analytically challenged. And then one more thing I want to bring up is a study released by our MIT colleagues that speaks to the practical outcomes of this shift toward analytics. In 2012, the MIT Center for Digital Business, along with research partner Capgemini, completed a 2-year study with more than 400 companies to determine which of those companies were achieving a digital advantage over their industry peers, and that's through the use of analytics, social media, mobile, and embedded devices. And this study found that companies that do more with digital technologies and this is a kind of an important point, and that support their digital investments with leadership and governance capabilities, these companies are 26% more profitable than their industry peers, and they outperform the average industry performance by 6 to 9%. So with those thoughts in mind, I'll turn the discussion back over to Pamela, and she can talk about how your organization can become more like an analytical innovator if you're not there already.
Thank you. I know that we have just a few minutes left, and there are quite a few questions. So I want to give due time to those, but I didn't want to give short shrift to this last slide on becoming more like an analytical innovator. So it's just some very simple phrases here, but it's not a simple process, as David mentioned. Some of the things that we've learned from this research, as well as other studies that we've conducted, is that it's really important for your organization to begin where you are. And what we mean by that is that you need to take stock of what your data looks like and the capabilities that you currently have, and be sure that you're not trying to overextend yourself or don't try to boil the ocean. From that, it means that what you need to do is to start with simple projects. We talked a lot about executive mandate, corporate culture, and the mindset of the analytical innovators. And if you're in that analytically challenged group, it's not going to be an easy jump from that to becoming an analytical innovator. So as an analytics champion yourself, one key thing is to try to find like minds. Other people in the organization who also want to use analytics to drive business decisions, and really collaborate with those folks, but in the process not alienate potential partners who could downstream help you with your analytics focus. I mentioned conducting a data and talent audit. It's really important to have your data in order before you start an analytics program. Even if it's a small project, you have to be sure that what you have and what you're looking at in terms of your analysis is data that's credible, accurate, reliable. Another important component is really trying to identify some low-hanging fruit and some quick wins. We talked a lot to organizations who have successfully pushed analytics to the organization, and one of the things that they did successfully was to convince management by showing them what analytics can do and the benefit with some small projects. So don't try to address those first analytics endeavors with overly complex issues. And then finally, it's really important to show demonstrable benefit and value of the analytics project, and that's, what kind of decision would be different if you used analytics. How is that going to change the decision that you make? How is that going to help the organization? And finally, it's really important, and I say this as an employee of a software company, but it's really important not to rely solely on technology. The talent, the culture, the processes, and the infrastructure, all of those things work together to build that analytics component in your organization, and it can't be just about the technology. So let's go ahead and move. I think, David, you have some wrap-up comments, and then we can move quickly to Q&A.
Let's talk about the poll results, and can everybody see that? So we had 31% of the people attending this webinar say they were describe themselves as analytically challenged. 43.1% describe themselves as analytical practitioners. 13.7% sort of identified themselves as analytical innovators. Recall that analytical innovators were 11% of our sample, 60%. So analytical practitioners sort of a little under, well, it's under what we had as analytical practitioners, and the analytically challenged group was slightly more robust in the folks attending this webinar than we had in our sample. So with that, thank you all for participating in the poll, and we're going to move right to the questions.
I do thank everybody for all of our presenters. Great job, guys. Before we start the Q&A, I do need to ask that you fill out this feedback form, which should have opened on your computer. Just please fill out the form, press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page, and thank you in advance for filling it out. Your participation really does help us improve future webinars. And so now we will move on to our Q&A session, and we just have time for one or two questions. If we get to those right away. We have a lot of questions around culture, and I don't know who wants to take this, maybe Pamela, but for instance, are analytics champions primarily CIOs, or someone wants to know whether you found champions across functional groups at the C-suite level?
That's a really interesting question. A lot of times the CIO is not the analytics champion. In many cases, the IT folks are those people that need to be convinced. The functional area that we find driving analytics as champions tends to be more in the marketing arena, because a lot of these people deal with large amounts of customer information and customer data. They're trying to predict customer behavior. So that tends to be really the analytics champion. From a functional perspective, we have had a rare case where the analytics championship was driven through IT, but that is typically the exception. David, Renee, do you have anything else to add to that?
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say that's I didn't have anything to add. Go ahead, Renee.
Yeah, no, I was thinking back to the survey results. I think, Pamela, you hit the high points there. Thanks.
Let's talk about sort of management, board-level rigor. I mean, is that typical of analytical innovators? How have they gotten success in achieving that sort of level of buy-in?
Renee, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I think we found with the analytical innovators, what is a really important point is that analytics is driven from the executive level. So it's not really, we found something that can be pushed from the bottom up. It has to be an executive mandate that comes from the top down. And I think Pamela's example of Oberweis was a really good example of that, in that analytics came from the CEO, and it sort of continued through a number of successes. And then when they came to this point of having a strategy meeting of how do we expand into the Eastern Seaboard, and they brought the analytics expert in the fold, he was backed by the CEO. There was a definite CEO mandate there. So I think without that there, he might not have been as successful in turning the insights around in the company.
Well,
yeah,
great.
and I would, I don't know, do you want to move on to another question, or I have something else to add on that if you...
Go ahead, David. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. We interviewed Jeannie Ross, who's the director of the MIT Sloan Center for Information Systems Research, and she talked about the need sometimes for she discussed an example in which the CEO comes in and the company was having real problems. They were not profitable, and he was having a discussion with his senior team, and the senior team all came to him and said, well, we're profitable in our group, and down the line. So he was left with this quandary. Everybody seems to think that they're profitable, but the company is not profitable, and he had to dictate how people are going to be reporting their results, and there was a real need for a burning platform for actually changing, and that was a burning platform for changing the way data was thought of and organized, and the approach.
I think we can squeeze in one more question, quick answer. Someone wants to know, during your research, what you found to be sort of the biggest bottlenecks most companies face in the use of analytics and getting to sort of that analytical innovation point.
I'll take that one. Another good question, because that comes up a lot in the research that we conduct on analytics. The biggest bottleneck in terms of analytics is actually at the beginning of the information value chain, and that's the data. Companies struggle with data accuracy, relevance, reliability, timeliness, and if those things are not in place, then downstream the analytics obviously will not be effective. It's the old garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. And that also impedes the credibility. If you are trying to be an analytics champion in your organization, it impedes the credibility of the analysis to those naysayers. Could be the executives who want to stick with the, an intuition experience-based kind of decision making. So the data is a key one. And then the second one, which is really critical, is the talent. Organizations often kind of put the cart before the horse, and they purchase the technology because it's the cool thing to do, and it's the data. As Tom Davenport says, being a data scientist is the sexiest job of the 21st century or something like that. But the lack of analytical talent in the organization, even if the company has the technology, often results in frustration and a lack of appropriate use of analytics, and then the big kind of trough of disillusionment, as Gartner would say, about the analytics investment. So just to reiterate, data being one, data quality, data management, and then two, analytical talent is a significant bottleneck in getting these analytical projects up and running and effective.
I would just add to that, there's also, I think you have to have a culture that embraces analytics, or will at least look at analytics for there to be a successful campaign or program.
Definitely agreed there. And we are out of time, so I wanted to thank our presenters, David, Renee, and Pamela. Great job. And thank everybody for attending today's webinar, Lessons from Analytical Innovators, Reimagining the Possible, brought to you today by SAS, MIT Sloan Management Review, and All Analytics.
Thank you.
For more information about today's webinar, please visit the resource link open before you. Within the next 24 to 48 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please note that this webinar is copyright 2013 by United Business Media. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if this is the case, by SAS, MIT Sloan Management Review, and All Analytics, who are solely responsible for their content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, David Kiron, Renee Boucher, Ferguson, and Pamela Prentice, I'm Beth Schultz. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.